Hi, this is Jamie Pate, and welcome to this card process video. I'm calling this project a pretty big card. And the reason I'm calling it a pretty big card is because it's big and it's pretty. The reason it's pretty is because I'm using this Honey&Spice collection by Heidi Swapp. And you can see I pulled together several items already. This embossing paper is going to be, I'm going to take out its package so you can see it. It's embossed with words all across it. You can see it really well there. And so I'm going to play with it. You're going to see how I'm going to have to kind of rework that a little bit. I have the ephemera kind of prepackaged in just a bag of mine and some washi tape. And a lot of times when I pull these supplies together, it doesn't necessarily mean I am going to be using them all. It could just be that I have an idea what I'm going to use them for, and they might not make the cut. A lot of these did make the cut, especially that rose gold vellum. It's absolutely gorgeous. Labels almost always make the cut. And so I'm starting off here. Kind of the approach to this process video was that I really wasn't quite sure the direction of this particular project. And usually I have a pretty good idea, but this is a bit of process and play and inviting you into that with me because a couple of mistakes were made and I wanted to show you how I tried to redeem those and how I went forward with those. So this is the embossing paper that's sitting here on the desk right now. And I now am pretty sure I'm going through and just making some decisions about the base of this pretty big card. Okay, so let's talk about the pretty big card for a second and to let you all know that this is a card that I guess doesn't necessarily need to be called a card as much as it's these tags. It's layers of tags. But the idea behind them is that it's a special card, it's a special gift for someone, usually a birthday. And I'm just going through the papers here and showing you what I love about the Honey&Spice patterns. And I showed you that cutaway page there that will be utilized in this project. But for the most part here, I'm looking for the base. I'm trying to decide what is going to be a good base for this card. And with this pretty big card, I do start from the end and I work my way up. What I'm doing here, though, is I'm going ahead and cutting up the embossing paper. And do you know how scary that is to cut up that embossing paper? Because it's a specialty paper. And again, not quite sure where it's going to go. But I went ahead and trimmed it to about, I want to say it's 4.5 by 9. No, 4.5 by 8. And I know once it finds its place in the card, it's going to be trimmed down further. So let's see, that is, yes, 4.5 by 8. So the idea with the embossing paper, with the embossed paper, it's an embossed paper. Let me say that correctly. The paper is embossed with words and phrases. I wanted to paint the surface and then go back over it and sort of wash off the top surface. Well, I learned a couple things while I was doing this. Number one was I probably should have used a dry brush technique instead of sort of finger painting this over the top of the embossed card. Lesson learned, so I will do that differently in the future. The next thing I learned is that while I love the color of this particular acrylic paint, it is just too opaque. And I really wanted something with better open time and something that I was going to be able to have better see-through quality. I went over the top of it with a baby wipe. It didn't really make much of a difference. So at this point, I believe I decided just to dry the surface and then go back over it with a sandy block. And so just pulling out my heat gun there and drying the surface, kind of speeding up this whole process a little bit. I decided to notice the very old quality and age of that sanding block, but I use it all the time still. I'll just use it until it just won't work anymore. And you can tell it's sort of taking off the top of the color, off the top of the words. And while I like that idea, boy, it still will not go in the direction that I had visualized. And I'm sure you can all relate to that experience where you have a plan and the plan is just not quite going in the direction that you want it to go, which, let's be honest here, that is just life, right? So you can see that it just dressed pretty well. It's not a completely lost piece. It's just not quite fitting in to the vision that I had for my pretty big card. So I am going to still match this up with that striped paper, and I've decided that striped paper is going to be a base. It's going to be the foundation piece. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that out also to the 4.5 by 8. And the card will be no bigger than those dimensions. Everything that will layer on top of this base will then come in a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller. And I decided I want that pink to be on the bottom, so that's why I flipped it. And so back with the embossed paper, I'm just trimming up the edges because I think at this point I'm going to go ahead and still layer it on top of the striped paper. And I'm going through the motions of that, and it's just still not happening for me. So what I'm going to do next is just play around with that, what I know is going to be the next layer, and that is the rose gold floral vellum, which is a beautiful part of this Honey and Spice collection. Now, once I popped it on top of the white, it was pretty clear to me I was getting in a better, different direction. I didn't like it over the pink. It wasn't giving me that, for lack of a better word, pop that I was looking for. And then here in a moment, I'm going to layer it over against something else. Well, now I've gone back to the tag. Okay, let's just pay attention here to very much the process in which I work. I'll often need to let something process. So I'm thinking about the vellum. And in the meantime, I am going to go ahead and back my foundation pattern paper with cardstock. I just want it to be a little beefier to be able to hold the tags that are going to be sitting on top of it. And for it, the thing about the 12 by 12 paper pad and the pattern paper that's found in there is that it doesn't have a very heavy weight. So a piece of basic cardstock backed behind the pattern paper just gives it a little more weight, and I always feel better about having that backed up. So I'm still processing through my layers while I finish and distress this tag. I know it feels like I might be spending a lot of time on the foundation, but once these parts get into their place, everything else starts to literally fall into place. It happens every time. Now, when I saw the vellum against the stripe, I knew that's exactly what I wanted that to look like. So I'm just going to measure out the vellum so that it will sit nicely on top of the base card. And with the idea being, I want the edges to show through. I'm going to want the previous tag to show through to the top. And this is not a perfect science, and sometimes not everything actually shows, but it's the idea going in as I create these layers. So even though I measured the end of the card there on the vellum, I will be cutting slightly inside of that, and you can see how now the vellum actually fits inside of that base card. I've grabbed the 6x6 pattern paper, and I am going to now be making a decision as to which of the next patterns will come into play on this card. My dilemma here is that with the 6x6 pattern, obviously the patterns are smaller, which I like, and I'm comparing it to the 12 by 12 because I might actually want the larger pattern. So it's just making a decision what I think looks best against the floral that's found on the vellum. And as you can see, I am going to go for the 6x6, and so I'm going to measure that out and give it place on this tag as well. This small pattern from the 6x6 paper is going to be a notch tag, so I've just cut a slit up the very middle part of the paper, maybe about 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch, and then I go in at the corners and trim up to the top of that cut, and that gives me a pretty good V-notch every time. And it was, as with all of the papers in the layers for this big card, I will be distressing all the edges. So now I'm making a decision about the next layer. I told you I was doing this as I went along. So I'm just trying to make a decision. This is a great cutaway page. Probably my favorite, well, I'll have to say one of my favorite patterns in the Honey&Spice, because there's a lot of great patterns in this page, in this collection. And so I decided on the love tag, and it's going to find a home here with the rest of the layers. One of the things you will find me doing is just playing with the layers as I go through. I'm always adjusting and trimming and making decisions as I go. So I'll start with the base and I'll layer things back up again, and then if I need to make an adjustment, if I need to make a change, I will. What I've done here is that geometric pattern has come in now between my notch tag and the vellum. I decided I needed another layer. And what I'm going to do with this layer is, you see I have grabbed a glassine bag from my stash, and I'm trimming that down because I like to have a pocket of some sort or something interactive in these cards that is going to hold the main message and the main sentiment of this card. So for example, this card is a birthday card for a friend. And so this is going to be the note to them, and it's stashed within the card itself. And it's just a fun way to add an interactive piece. And as I do with a lot of times, I'm just using a ruler and tearing the paper. And so, well, here's an example of how I fidget with my layers. So I'm layering them all in again. I want you guys to see how these layers are building. And again, for my own self, I'm just making sure things are fitting the way they should fit and that the measurements are good. And so we will actually be wrapping up the idea behind this card here pretty soon. I think a lot of times I get stuck on the idea that a tag card needs to all just be these, I guess you would say descending sizes, but I'm going to kind of change that up here. I'm going to bring in what I call a V-notched banner. It's a smaller version of that tag that you can see right below there. And so it's going to play with some of the sizes of the layers as well. And you'll see how this placement goes. And you're going to see how my mistake from earlier in the process of making this card is going to come into play right next to this as well. So I have grabbed the embossed paper, and we are completely just chucking the whole tag, and I am trimming off instead a sentiment that's found on the card that I just happened to paint. So again, I use the straight edge to tear. It's going to give me some great edges on that tag that I'm going to really like to play up against the beauty and the delicacy, I guess, if you will, of the Honey&Spice. So I'm going to get this tag all ready, and it's going to, at first it's going to appear on top, and that's really where I intended for it to go. You're going to see later on how it's actually going to be layered with the smaller notch tag that is now part of our layers. I'm going to speed this up now that I have all my layers ready. I know what's going to be part of this card. I'm at this point probably not going to add anything else to it except for the embellishing part. So I'm starting again with the back, with the very bottom piece. And please forgive the quality of my video. I am playing against a whole lot of sun coming in, so your screen is not going in and out. That is the video quality, and I am working on adjusting that. So what I did here, I just used the Honey&Spice stamp set, added a sentiment, and then I layered a butterfly that I had paper punched. I have two of them layered there, and then I stapled them, and I think I might have attempted to hot glue them on, but I might have used glue dots, which also gives great dimension. I was trying to decide if I needed any other sentiment on here, and sometimes less is more, just like in the example of that layer. The vellum won't get any embellishment. The vellum is beautiful enough embellishment for me. I am cutting out a half circle to the top of that glassine bag, just so it's easier for the tag to go in and out. And, you know, I might not have decided on that tag yet, so I still believe I need to bring that part into play here. So I'm making sure that wherever I place this bag, or this pocket, if you will, that you can't see it from underneath. I kind of wanted that to be a surprise part to this card. I've made a decision on what tag is going to go inside, and then I'm like, do I utilize the scalloped top of that card? I could probably use that somewhere else. Do I really want to fussy cut it right now? And there's your answer. I do not want to fussy cut it right now. I have gone ahead and just straight edge torn that, and I will probably be adding another element to the top of it to make it even easier to pull in and out of there. I'm going to add a couple of embellishments. I just love the stamp set so much. If you get anything from this collection, you just need that stamp set. I have yet to play with that enough. I keep seeing it, I keep having ideas. And along that line, any of the supplies that you're looking for that could go along with making your own pretty big card, I've got those linked below. I also have a blog post that is linked to this video as well. So you can just see a little bit more up close to details of the finished card. And you can find that on my blog. It's linked below, or that's just simply at jamiepate.com. All right, finishing up with this layer. It took a little bit longer because then I decided, yes, I did want a little pull-out piece. And so I just took pattern paper, flipped it over, and it's going to be stapled to that tag. And that's just a real easy go-to technique for adding interactive pieces to your pages, whether it's a scrapbook page, whether it's a card like here, whether it's a mini album. It's just kind of a go-to technique right there. And then the process of going through a couple pieces of ephemera to decide how I want the top to be finished out. And then as it was, I didn't even use any of the ephemera. Instead, I layered a label. I'm always using labels. I just have a stash of labels always on hand. And I love them as layering pieces. I love to add sentiments to them. I popped up the Good Time sticker as kind of the title of this card, if you will. And so for the most part, this is complete. I'll walk you through the layers one more time. There's our base with a little bit of embellishing, that beautiful vellum, nice layering piece. The geometric pattern that holds our sentiment in our pocket with the tag that pulls out pretty easy. A notch tag, you can see now where those pieces decided to land. And that is how you put together this pretty big card. Thank you so much for hanging in there and watching all this. You can link below to supplies, and I will see you next time.